and sit down at the table with love.
Today I'm going to talk to you about the Hebrew calendar. Before I start, I really want to pray, because if there's ever confusion in understanding the pattern of the feasts, it seems to come with the calendar. It's really not hard to understand. It's just so foreign to us. You know, we're used to a Gregorian calendar. And when all of a sudden we're looking at this other calendar that has different Hebrew names, and it's very foreign for us. The things I'm going to share with you today, you can go over, you can do a more in-depth study by yourself, and I really recommend that. But really, it's not hard. There's a simple thing I want you to see about the calendar today that's important to understand before we start talking about how Jesus fulfilled the pattern of the Leviticus 23 feasts. The whole Bible is on this calendar, and God's appointments are on this calendar. So it is important that we have an understanding of it. And even after a while, you'll see as you go through the scriptures dates that line up, that things that happened on the same dates. And it was so easy before. I would just skip over when I saw dates because I didn't understand what those months were. Again, it helps your treasure hunt when you go looking to understand the feasts and to see and find Jesus in the feast. So I'm just going to pray and hope that you'll grasp this by revelation. So Holy Spirit, as I share the things that you've showed me about this Hebrew calendar, this calendar that your appointments are on, I ask that you would help us, that you would help all those listening to give us a simple understanding. Give us the spirit of revelation, that as they're watching it, even if they don't understand it first, as they spend time with it, that they'll have one of those moments where it just clicks. So Lord, open up our eyes, open up our understanding, so we can align with you on this calendar, on this heavenly calendar that you've created for us to understand. So I ask that you bless my ability to communicate it, and that you bless the ears that are listening. And I pray that in Jesus' name. So, okay, I'm going to have, I think up on the screen, the first chart. We're going to have to look at a few charts to understand this, and I'm going to try to explain it simply, like I said. So the first one, the first chart is this round. You'll see a round chart, and you'll see the names on the outside of this circle. It's a circular chart, and you'll see the outside of it has all the Hebrew dates on it from the Hebrew calendar. On the inside, it's where our calendar, the Gregorian calendar, our months line up. Just to give you an understanding of what season these months fall in, and if I'm talking about, say, Aviv or Nisan, we know that that's in the spring. That's when Passover begins. So after a while, this will become familiar to you. So that's just something to have in front of you, and it just helps to, when you're trying to calculate which month, what time of the year, it'll show you how it correlates to our Gregorian calendar. The main thing about the Jewish calendar is times and seasons. Remember, I shared that verse in Genesis 1:14 that he put the moon and the sun in the sky as signals. It says signs, and that word is signals to earth of the seasons, and that word there is feast of his Moedim. So the moon is important. The Hebrew calendar is actually not a full lunar calendar. It's a solar lunar calendar. I can't explain that to you, but if you want to, look into that further, there's people that understand that. I don't. And it's really not necessary for you to understand it to get the teaching that I'm going to share with you as far as the importance of this calendar. But it's interesting. So if you want to check it out. The Islamic calendar is a purely lunar calendar. And of course, our Gregorian calendar is a solar calendar, according to the sun. A Hebrew calendar has 12 months, just like ours does, but their days are either 29 or 30 days. And they add an extra month, a whole month, every 3 years, because their calendar actually comes to 354 days. Instead of ours, that's 365. So it's a leap month. Every 3 years, they'll add a leap month. An example of that would have been this last year in 2020, in the spring, in March, when Purim, the Feast of Esther, happens, the Hebrew month of Adar. There was 2 months of Adar this year. So there was a double month. It was the leap month, a leap year for that extra month to be added. It was actually 2. They only celebrated Purim once, but it was recognized as 2 times. What I want to show you next about the Hebrew calendar, and this is the important part that I want you to see, is that the Jews believe that the birthday of the world, began on the month of Tishrei, the first day. So Tishrei 1 is the birthday of the world. It's known even still today as Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, and it's known as the first month on the civil calendar. Now, hold on a minute. I don't want to confuse you, but because the birthday of the world, we always want to celebrate the birthday of the world. So because it was on Tishrei 1, that's when the new year begins. And in ancient Israel, the way they would find and begin the calendar for the civil calendar, for the earthly calendar, let's call it that, was to go out onto the hilltops, because all the months of the year would be set to this first new moon of Tishrei 1. Now you're going to see why that's important in the fall feast teaching. It's also when Rosh Hashanah, head of the year, Happy New Year. But it's also Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets, the first fall feast begins on Tishrei 1. They would go out onto the hilltops, look for the first sliver of a new moon on Tishrei 1, and signal back to Jerusalem that they could start calculating all the months, the months for that year. It was the first month on the civil calendar. It was the only calendar that the Jews had until the book of Exodus. So from Genesis, when the world was created, to Exodus 12, whenever you see the months listed, Tishrei is considered the first month because it's the birthday of the world. In Exodus 12:1, God did something that was important to him. He always separates the common or the secular from the sacred or the holy. And all of a sudden, from Genesis to Exodus 12, things were just going along, and all of a sudden it was time. It was time for his appointments on his appointment calendar that we talked about in Leviticus 23. It was time for those appointments to be walked out by Moses and the children of Israel, for this pattern to be established of redemption. And this pattern, we're going to see in the next couple sessions from now, is the exact same pattern. These steps of redemption that began in Exodus 12, that Moses walked the children of Israel through. 1,500 years later, a prophet, capital P, like Moses, it says in Deuteronomy 18:18, was coming to walk through the same pattern of redemption. That would be the Goel, the anointed one. But first Moses took the children of Israel through this pattern. And we're going to see that in a couple sessions from now. But what's so important to understand is, so Tishrei 1 was the first month, the day the world began. You know, from that time period, like 2,000 years or whatever it was, between Genesis and Exodus. All the events before that you'll see in the Bible are according to Tishrei being the first month. But what happened in Exodus 12, and let's read it, because God is ready to start his courtship with his bride. And this is a holy moment. It's one he's waited for and he's planned for. And he orchestrated. He chose one man, Abraham, a righteous man, to be the father. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs, he chose them. And from them came this family that by the time they got to Egypt, there was a family of 70 that turned into a multitude of millions. And in Exodus 12 is when he's going to begin. He sees them, he anoints them as his betrothed. He's going to take these slaves and he's going to take them through some steps of redemption that are going to take them into his household by the blood, take them through the waters of the Red Sea, take them to a mountain for marriage eventually. So he's taking out a bride of Egypt. He's courting his bride and taking them to a mountain. This is a holy moment for the Lord. He's waited a long time for it. So because it's a holy moment, he has to separate these events, his appointments, and put them on a heavenly calendar. So the months aren't going to change. All these Hebrew months will stay the same. But what he's going to do is he's going to now take what used to be the 7th month, which is called Aviv at this point in history. Okay, let me just say, not complicated. There's 4 months on the Hebrew calendar that have their names were changed after the Babylonian captivity. So in Exodus, this month, what would be either the 7th month, is now going to become the first month. Aviv is either Nisan or Aviv. If you see the name Nisan, it's the name that was changed after the Babylonian captivity, but it's the same as the month of Aviv, A-V-I-V, or Nisan, N-I-S-S-A-N, same month. 2 different names. We didn't need that to further complicate this, but I just had to say that. God is now going to take this time period. He's going to come down and take his people out. And all of a sudden, he's going to separate. He wants his appointments on a heavenly calendar. Exodus 12:1, it says, "Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you from this point on." So he takes Aviv, Nisan, that used to be the 7th month, and he's going to turn it into the first month. I hate to call it a religious calendar, but it's on his appointment book calendar. There's still the civil calendar. There's still events going on earth marked by the beginning of time, the birthday of the world. There's still going to be that civil calendar, but there's going to be a heavenly calendar with God's appointments that now the first month on the religious calendar or the holy calendar now is going to be Aviv. In a sense, they don't have two calendars, but they have two first months. So just know that from this point on in Exodus 12 on, every time you see a date, it's according to this heavenly calendar. It's calculating Aviv or Nisan when he took his people out of captivity as the new first month. Well, there is another chart I put up, and you'll see in the square that would be, if you're just looking at it as a calendar, the square that would be like where our January is, it's the first month. On the top, it's the first month on the sacred calendar, which now is going to turn Tishrei on the secular calendar. On the sacred calendar, on the heavenly calendar. Now Tishrei is going to become the seventh month, which makes sense because if we're talking about something holy, all the fall feasts, very holy events, the summation of the second coming of Jesus, coming for a bride, a wedding, cleansing the earth, wedding supper of the Lamb. It's so fitting that they would happen on the seventh month. The number 7 is a sabbatical, a Sabbath in Hebrew understandings. A result of what happens on the seventh month on the religious calendar in the future is an eternal Sabbath. When you hear Jews on Tishrei 1 in the fall celebrate Rosh Hashanah, which means head of the new year, they're celebrating the birthday of the world when all the calendars are set. And it's called the civil calendar, when all the events on earth are taking place. In synagogue, on this holy calendar, that same day, Yom Teruah, the day of blowing of trumpets, it's the seventh month on the religious calendar. So you can look at it like this. We all have a birthday of when we were born into the world. But then we have a day when we were born again, when we have a heavenly birthday, the day the angels rejoiced when we gave our lives to the Lord Jesus. That is our spiritual birthday. And so it's kind of the same thing. We have two birthdays. We have two times we celebrate, when we were born and then when we were born again. So the world was born on Tishrei 1. The nation of Israel was born again on Nisan, Aviv, on that first month. Another good way, if you want to see it, this is a better way to explain it maybe, or maybe you'll get another picture, and so maybe all this will make sense. We'll put the 2 theater calendar up. Maybe this will help too. So on your screen right now, and it's also in the Afikoman book, on page 255. It's 2 calendars that are 2 theaters. This helped me. When I saw this, it helped explain something. We are kind of, in our Greek thinking, we're pretty much one-dimensional. When you start seeing things through a Hebrew lens, they see things in 3D color. By that I mean there's this understanding of 2 theaters. The idea is that there's 2 things going on all the time. Heaven has activity all the time. The earth has activity all the time. There's things going on, being played out on earth. But in heaven, what's going on might be totally different. Aligning with heaven, but heaven is on a different theater. We are seated with him in heavenly places. Our home is in heaven, even right now. Even though we're walking out our lives on the earth, our lives are calibrated to what's going on in heaven. And heaven is on this calendar, where his appointments are. Heaven is on this calendar that started in Exodus 12. So what you see there is the heavenly calendar kind of up in a cloud, which is Nisan. I put the new name because that's why a lot of things go by the name after the Babylonian captivity. So Nisan or Aviv is the heavenly calendar where the events of heaven are taking place, where the courtship of his bride began on this month, where his whole plan of redemption plays out and is fulfilled. It's the Lord's calendar is the one in heaven. And then we see the one on earth where, the creation of the earth takes place and people are just going about their business. Most people just oblivious that there's any other calendar. Even Jews, they might be aware of the heavenly calendar or the sacred calendar if they go to synagogue. But secular Jews will just live their life, celebrate Rosh Hashanah, Happy New Year, celebrate the new year, and then go about their business. But in heaven, there's events taking place. Once we get into the fall feast, this idea of 2 theaters will really make sense to you. But, you see in the book of Isaiah, all of a sudden Isaiah is talking about Hezekiah's army. He's taken up into a heavenly theater and he sees different things. He's seeing things from the Lord's perspective. It's the same with John on the island of Patmos, Revelation 4. All of a sudden he's taken up to a heavenly reality. He's telling the things that he's seeing not only in heaven, but what's going on earth at the same time. And there's 2 different things going on. We'll see that when we study the fall feast. mostly when we study the end times, we look at what is going on earth in the book of Revelation. But there's things going on in heaven too, simultaneously. And we see that a lot in the Bible. There's a lot of going up and down. People, Daniel saw things in the heavens, and Paul was taken to heaven and was shown mystery. There's two theaters. We are on this earth, but we are in sync with that heavenly calendar. The appointments of heaven are taking place in this heavenly calendar that started in Exodus 12. And God said, now I'm going to begin my courtship with my bride. I want it to be on a heavenly calendar. I don't want it to be the same as the earthly calendar. I'm separating it. It's sacred. It's holy. My timetable, my events, this blueprint of redemption is all going to take place from heaven. And this is the new calendar. It's important to understand that there's two first months. Tishrei is the first month on the civil calendar, but Aviv Nisan is the first month on God's calendar that we're going to be walking on, or we are walking on, whether we realize it or not, that he's on, and he wants us with him where he is. It's a privilege to be called to this heavenly calendar and to start understanding the events that take place there. So it's important for you to understand these truths. This is where God is, and this is what we're going to be looking at. So, study it. This is something you kind of do have to study, or at least keep asking for revelation. I think if you see it as two theaters, a heavenly calendar and an earthly one, that might be the easiest way for you to understand. Another thing I'll just tell you, just because it's kind of interesting to look at, is the Jewish people believe in the 7,000-year plan of God. Just like the pattern was in the book of Genesis, he created the earth in 6 days. But then on the seventh day was the Sabbath. And it's interesting to know, it says in Genesis that it was evening and morning one day. Jewish days begin at sundown and end at sundown. And I love that because, I told you light always triumphs. So it starts in the evening with the darkest time of the night being at midnight, and then progressively finishes as it gets lighter and lighter. So sundown to sundown. And it's interesting that, as I just said, midnight is the darkest hour of the day with the least amount of sun. And it's at midnight, I'm going to throw this out there, a little tidbit. It's at midnight that often the bridegrooms would come abduct their bride. And it was at midnight at the darkest hour when Peter was released from prison. It was at midnight that all sorts of things happen in the Bible. It's usually the darkest hour is when God breaks through. So that's just a little clue about time. But then also 6 days and then the Sabbath. The days of the week in Hebrew don't have a name. The Sabbath is the only one that has a name. So it's day 1, counting after the Sabbath, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, and then Sabbath. Only the Sabbath gets honored as holy and given a name. And just like that, they believe in a 7,000-year plan of God, where there's 6,000 years of human history. As it's turning into the 7,000th year is when his second coming, when all the events that bring, the wedding feast, the cleansing of the earth of all evil, a new millennium, and then cleansing of the earth, and his throne comes down, and it's called the Olam Haba, the age to come, when we're ruling and reigning with him on the earth, that will begin on the 7,000th year. So it's interesting that the 7th month on the religious calendar, all those events start, and on the 7,000th year time, that's when things will be a new world, the age to come. Everything's so perfect. There's so much to study and there's so much to know. I hope that you understood all that, and I'll pray that you do. And if you have any questions, hopefully I can answer them. It's not my strongest subject. I know the basics of the calendar, and it's worked pretty well to help me understand the last 45 years. I just want to share one more thing with you, because it's interesting. Once you start learning the calendar, the Hebrew calendar, you'll see that there's different dates that line up. And again, be aware of if the date that's listed is before Exodus 12, because then it's going to be according to the civil calendar, or if it's after Exodus 12. So an example would be, if you read in Genesis 8, verse 4, it says, speaking of Noah's Ark, that the ark rested on the mountain, Mount Ararat, on the 17th day of the 7th month. Well, that would have been on the civil calendar. The 7th month back then was Aviv, or Nisan, which is after Exodus 12 would be the first month. So Aviv 17, then that's how you would calculate that date. Well, it's also the same date that the children of Israel were raised on dry ground after they crossed the Red Sea. And it's also the day that Jesus was raised from the dead. So it's interesting. When dates correlate like that, you go, wow, God is so perfect, and his word is so perfect. And the treasure hunt gets more and more fun when we understand all these things that have been hidden for all these years. I hope that helps. Bless you.